we're f***ed. Monster Hunter Wilds, it looks awful, it runs awful, it looks like shit, it plays like shit. Honestly, it is a really fun looking game when you do have it running at a decent level, but even then running it on the recommended hardware as found out by Digital Foundry, well, you're just not going to have a good experience with that either. And if you do want to get 60 FPS, you're going to have to use frame generation, unfortunately. Now, it's really unfortunate because Resident Evil, a game done by Capcom as well, in the RE engine that is really highly scalable, and the game I've covered before on the Steam Deck. Now, this was on the original Steam Deck, not the Steam Deck OLED, but we could see here in this heavily run area where I did a bunch of benchmarks, we were able to get 40 FPS going consistently in this game. And this was at like decent settings. It wasn't at the dumped lowest settings with FSR Ultra Performance. Well, if you want to play Monster Hunter Wilds or even think about playing Monster Hunter Wilds on your handheld or even on a lower end device, you're going to have to dump it down to the lowest settings. And with that introduces FSR Ultra Performance, not even Performance, and that's at 720p, 800p on the Steam Deck, on the ROG Ally. It's just an absolute mess. Now, when we're talking about games being scalable, as Kim Pallister says here in this article, it says trolls should attack with the same speed and ferocity on both high and low end systems. Now you're thinking, okay, this isn't a new concept, and no, you're not wrong. This article is from November 1999. So it's not a new concept to these people and game developers, and honestly, they're not wrong. Kim Pallister saying that the troll should attack with the same speed and ferocity. That's basically, it boils down to, yes, like the bare minimum should be a playable experience where you're able to interact with the world. Maybe you have your settings turned down, but like they're saying in the article here, whether your graphics are turned down or not, you're still getting the same fundamental experience of a troll wanting to lop your head off. So, if you can't even get that done in a Monster Hunter type game, where yes, monsters are literally trying to lop your head off, you're not getting that scalable experience on a lower end system, and you're just not getting a good consistent experience. Now, what is a consistent experience? I would say 30 FPS at bare minimum, and that is not 30 FPS sometimes, that's 30 FPS most of the time. So, Monster Hunter Wilds, I really wanted to get into this and really start benchmarking it, but I unfortunately just couldn't. So the shaders, they took about like 2 hours on one device. On another device, I went and took a shower for 20 minutes, went and walked the dogs for about 30 minutes, came back, and the shaders were still only about halfway done. So when you're playing on the Steam Deck OLED, the ROG Ally, and my Asus PX13 here, it's an AI 365 chip with the 880M Plus, so that's the successor to the 780M. So it's maybe a potential look into a next-gen experience, but it has 24 gigabytes of RAM as well. So the footage I'm showing here, it's all dumped lowest preset, so that's FSR3 Ultra Performance, 800p or 720p on either devices, and this is with every eye candy just turned down. So this is without frame generation as well, and we can see in the opening area here, just between the different devices, it's terrible. This is supposed to be the big like opening scene, and oh yeah, here's the new big open world, new adventure. You're riding your mount that, oh, now you can fly. All this is so cool, but it's just hindered by the low performance, the terrible inconsistent performance. If I was getting even a solid 25 FPS consistently, I might be able to enjoy it on certain devices. But not even getting that, or even a consistent 30, at times you might, but most of the times you're not. And this is only at the beginning of the game. Sure, this is a heavier cutscene, but it's all rendered in-game, so it should be pretty indicative of a bigger monster battle. And knowing from what I know of the series, there is some pretty big, serious battles. So as mentioned, that was all without frame generation on those devices. But if you do turn frame generation on, like I'm showing in the pond scene here, you're left with this visual anomaly, and it just looks terrible. Like, I really don't know why the developers were really heavily reliant on the frame generation to achieve playable frame rates. And this is in their recommended high and even ultra presets in their preset recommendation chart. It just looks terrible. Like, even going from 30 FPS to 60 FPS, it looks a little bit better than what I'm showing here, but not by much. Not by a long shot. Unfortunately, frame generation is here to stay, whether you love it or hate it. I do appreciate the technology, and it is interesting, and when it's used in the correct scenario of 60 plus FPS base input, yes, you're getting a really good experience. You're not going to get better input latency, but it's just going to look smoother to your eyes. So within the Monster Hunter Wilds even preset chart here, we can see that everything except for the minimum is with frame generation enabled, and you're only getting a 60 FPS experience with that. So even as Digital Foundry tested in their experience of using a 4070 Ti, you were still getting a very, very poor and inconsistent experience with or without frame generation. And as I said before, frame generation at these low frame rates and even lower frame rates just result in a terrible visual experience, and it actually just makes it play even worse. So in a game like Monster Hunter Wilds, where you're actually needing to react very meticulously with your actions, you're not going to be able to do that effectively at all playing this on a handheld or even a lower end system, and maybe even a mid-range system with the amount of issues that Digital Foundry was finding in their video. If you're thinking it's just a handheld that's not meant to run this game at all, well, you're kind of dead wrong at that point, because the handheld market is blooming and blossoming, whatever you want to call it, but it is alive and well, and the Steam Deck is kind of the case in point. And with the Steam Deck verified tags that they give it on all these new AAA game releases, a little bit more on that later, people are playing these games solely on these devices now. I don't think people are sometimes playing, okay, desktop and handheld. I think there is a lot more separation now of, okay, people are just going straight handheld for their gaming needs because of how expensive desktops currently are and the increasing costs of a graphics card. So if people are saying, okay, I can go and buy a $500 to $800 handheld and get a pretty good all-in-one experience and still be able to play PC games, well, that's going to be your buyers, and hopefully they're wanting to play all these AAA release games too. And it's not unimaginable, because these manufacturers are actually advertising it of, okay, play your games anywhere. Play any game you own anywhere. And this is in reference to like Xbox Game Pass or Epic Game Store and whatever you want to play it on. But as well, it's also including just new release games. And if it's not playing the newest release games, people will always say, well, you can play the thousands of other games that have been released over the past decades. Well, I hate to break it to you, a lot of people don't play those games. There is probably a certain cutoff point, I would say, for what people are willing to play, if it's whether maybe it's 20, 30, 40 years old or something like that, you know? And yes, like PC gaming really only took off in the early 2000s, I would say, of getting like kind of these big bombastic releases. But even then, the gameplay just wasn't really kind of up to snuff, and comparing it to certain games today, I can totally see an environment where people just do not want to play a game from 20 years ago. Much in the same of how certain people just cannot watch a black and white movie or a movie with subtitles, things like that. It's purely preference and what they enjoy, and you can't really knock them for it. And now, if we're saying, okay, Monster Hunter Wilds is not a handheld-friendly game or handheld-verified game, because yes, it does require at least a GTX 1660 for their minimum requirements with 6 gigabytes of VRAM. So when we're talking about playing modern games and how they're scalable, we can see that the Spider-Man 2 here, recent release, it was recently just verified on Steam Deck as well. The minimum GPU required for that is a GTX 1650. And okay, well, you're saying, well, that game is just a little bit more optimized, it's had a bit more patches out, stuff like that. If we want to look at the relative performance of a 780M found in the ROG Ally, Lenovo Legion Go, ROG Ally X, that stuff, and also it's a 7840U, so it's a popular handheld iGPU, sorry. But if we get into that, looking at the 780M, comparing it to a 1650, it's actually technically 5% faster in this relative performance chart provided by Tech PowerUp. Now, if we do go up to the 1660, it's about 40% or so, I believe, more powerful, 46% more powerful, 42% more powerful, sorry, than the 780M. And if we look at that, okay, sure, that's not really going to hold a candle in the wind to the 780M integrated graphics, but we've seen time and time again where games have required more than that as a minimum, and the Steam Deck or the Ally or whatever you're playing on has been able to handle it no problem. And it's actually been able to look pretty decent at times too. But then when we look at Monster Hunter Wilds, again, it just looks terrible, and honestly, even at the highest settings, it just looks garbage. And when you're introducing the upscaling at these low resolutions, it just garbage in, garbage out. So you're getting all these artifacts, and then the frame gen, it's even worse. And it's sad that this is the kind of state of modern gaming, if you will, because even with the Spider-Man 2 being a Steam Deck verified game, if you want to call it that, even in that game, and I'll show some footage here, we're still getting drops well below 30 FPS, and at one point there was a big stutter in my gameplay. I was recording off camera there, and it's... to say that that is a verified or enjoyable or playable experience, because it doesn't look the greatest either. You need to have DRS or dynamic resolution scaling on at 30 FPS, so that's going to potentially go as low as ultra performance on upscaling as well. Why are we accepting this? You know, I accept the fact that people are a little apologetic or make excuses or whatever for handhelds, and they're okay with the compromise, if you will, of having to dump the settings just for the sake of, oh, I get to play my games kind of anywhere on the go, play it on an airplane, whatever. And people are, I guess, probably quite fine with obviously not playing with high-end graphics, if the Nintendo Switch is anything to say about that of a handheld experience. But when we're playing these big AAA games of like Spider-Man 2, another game I'm really excited for, but I will not play on a handheld because it just looks and plays terribly. And then if you introduce frame generation, okay, you're getting up to like maybe 60 FPS in that game on the Steam Deck. But again, that's just adding more input latency because of that low conversion. It's not a lot of input latency, but if you're doing the low frame rates, it does introduce a lot more input latency than it does at the higher frame rates. So when you're playing it at 30 FPS, like Monster Hunter Wilds is recommending to do, and then enable frame generation to get to 60 FPS, it's going to feel muddy, soupy, whatever kind of descriptor you want to use of that when you're moving your character and camera around. And then again, like in Monster Hunter Wilds, you're just not going to have the good reaction times. And even Spider-Man, if you're playing at a higher difficulty, you can definitely get yourself killed quite easily because of these delays and glitches and stutters. So when we're looking at what is playable, I don't know. Like personally for me, playable is 30 FPS consistently 95% of the time. I'm okay with dips here and there, especially when things happen, but when we're talking about a 30 or 60 FPS lock or something like that, we need to compare it to something like a console, like an Xbox Series S, if you will. And especially with the rumored, not rumored Xbox handheld, but that they are working on something. Phil Spencer said as much. Who knows when that would be out. But when and if that does come out, I would hope that their standard for that device would be able to run most any game that the Xbox Series S would be able to run at 30 FPS bare minimum relatively consistently. Yes, there are some games that don't run consistently, and Monster Hunter Wilds on the consoles is a garbage mess there too. But why is Valve going out and verifying these games like Spider-Man 2, which are clearly not a solid experience to play it on? Sure, you can play it, you can have an okay experience, but honestly, it's not my recommended way to play it because of all these stutters, dips, and whatever that just don't happen on a properly spec'd system. But if they were able to scale it down lower, like, why aren't they able to do that? Again, I'll reference Resident Evil 4 looking damn good at its settings, and even when you dump it down to its lowest settings, it looks leagues better than what Monster Hunter Wild looks like and performs a million times better. How are they able to implement that? Sure, it was a cross-release game. It was coming out on the PS4 and Xbox One X and all that stuff. But it looks a lot better. Sure, it's not an open-world game, but I know they can do much better. Even the Monster Hunter game that came out on the Nintendo Switch and then later on PC, the last release before this one, sure, it was cut down visually for it to be able to run on the Nintendo Switch, but it was quite scalable, and then when you put it on a higher-end system, when they put it on PC, you were able to get a high refresh rate at 4K with super sampling. It wasn't blowing the doors off, but it was a very stylized, visually good-looking game, and it looked 10 times better than this game. And with Dragon's Dogma 2 as well, that they released earlier last year, I think it's suffering from the same issues of all these kind of like stutters and whatever. I don't personally own it, but I know just from the reviews that I saw from it, it's very similar playing and poor performance to Monster Hunter Wilds. So I don't know. What's your opinion on what is playable and what is not? Do you think handheld gaming is kind of doomed, or modern gaming is doomed? What are we going to expect to see when something like GTA 6 comes out on PC? If it comes out day and date with the consoles or PlayStation, whatever, what are we going to see that looking like on PC. Hopefully with the GTA 5 release and the Enhanced Edition coming up in a couple of days, we'll get maybe a slight glimpse into what that would look like, but I highly doubt it, because the ray tracing stuff included in that game, even on the consoles, is not probably as intensive as the stuff that they're using in their quote-unquote next-gen system for GTA 6. But are we expecting GTA 6 to be a playable game on handhelds? Obviously everyone's hoping it is, but are we going to be expecting to be able to play it on a handheld like the Steam Deck or an ROG Ally 1, ROG Ally X, whatever Ally 2 comes out, whatever 3, 4, what are we hoping to be able to run this on? And at the end of the day, do people ultimately care? Because there's going to be that subset of people that are just going to be able to play all of these games at these dumped settings with frame generation on, and it's going to look and feel like crap to somebody kind of like in the know, or that just kind of actually takes time to look for these things and is hindered by these things. Do people care? The masses are still buying these games. They're still playing them on the handhelds. I personally wouldn't be playing AAA games on handhelds anymore if I could help it. It's fun when a game does work, but it's not expected anymore. And it's a shame, because that's just a sign of things to come in the future, especially with Monster Hunter Wilds. And it's not just Monster Hunter Wilds specifically. I'm just using this as, I guess, my punching bag, because I was really going to do a full dedicated benchmark video and then release this video separately as a different topic video. But because of all the stuff going on with this game and all my issues I had with it, I didn't even get the benchmark. And I put like 12, 15 hours into this game, and the majority of that was just compiling shaders and being locked out by anti-cheat. So even with the anti-cheat, I was playing it on my Asus PX13. I rebooted my laptop, and then it locked me out of it. What the fuck? Like, why can't I play my games, Capcom? And no, it's not Capcom specifically, it's these anti-cheat stuff, anti-tamper, but not every game needs it, not every game needs to have it, and it just makes for a worse experience. Sure, it's a 1% issue of not being able to launch my game on 20 million different devices just to test it out, as we find with the de novo anti-cheat, and how that will actually eat into your performance, and when games remove that, or if you remove it manually through a crack or something, you will gain performance typically, especially on these lower end devices. Well, that'll kind of do it for this little bit of a unhinged but hopefully sort of semi-controlled rant that I've got about the Monster Hunter Wilds, modern gaming. It's just a shitty place to be in. It just really sucks, because handheld gaming is fun and it's enjoyable, but it's hard to recommend to everyone, because people are just always going to be wanting and expecting to be able to play these new games on their handhelds, and when they can't, they're going to be upset. Oh, this thing's not powerful enough. And then unfortunately, they're either going to give up on it, or they're going to be basically forced into upgrading their device each and every year, even if it is just a 5 to 10% increase each year. Well, a 5% increase to 25 FPS could put it up over 30. It's just one of those things where I would like to be able to keep a handheld like the Steam Deck as more of a console type, and they've done a really good job at that, and maintaining scalability into their devices, into their systems, and working with developers. But at the end of the day, that thing is just kind of long in the tooth as well, performance-wise, and hopefully we see some sort of Steam Deck 2 in the near future. And if we're able to maybe get a higher TDP of maybe like 25 watts or something like that, that would really help for those kind of like docked experiences, or when you're plugged in, and especially if they've already implemented the fact with having a 90 Hz screen. Hopefully we'll have a 120 Hz screen in the future. But if these games can't be played on it, are people going to buy it? Are people going to enjoy it? Or again, are you just going to be that slack-jawed person that's like, whatever, it plays, it's fine, it looks okay? Let me know in the comments. Do you think the modern gaming is just kind of dying? And if you're looking for some benchmarking content, actual benchmarking content coming up, I will be doing the GTA 5 Enhanced Edition compared to the normal on a bunch of handhelds. Hopefully that game isn't a bit of a dumpster fire when it comes out, but we'll see on launch. And as always, I hope you all have a great day.